The Ohio State Buckeyes have been one of college football's best programs in recent memory and over the last two seasons. But over those last two seasons, their arch rival Michigan has established themselves as the kings of the Big Ten. What's it going to take for the Scarlet and Gray to reclaim their throne?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
You know, a couple of things are crazy to me. It's crazy the amount of success that Ryan Day has had since becoming the head coach at Ohio State. It's crazy just the amount of games they win and win and win. It's also crazy to me that some people think that he's on the hot seat despite winning 11 games over each of the past two seasons. Okay, the amount of success both on the field and the recruiting success, being able to bring in elite talent year after year after year, is crazy for Ohio State. But you can win every other game if you're a head coach at Ohio State and also Michigan, but we're talking about the Buckeyes here. You can win every other game as a head coach in Columbus, Ohio, but I think the scrutiny comes when you can't win that one game. And that one game has been against the Michigan Wolverines. Of course, the last couple of seasons, Ryan Day has only beaten Michigan one time in 3 tries. Let's take a look at some more numbers for Ryan Day. He's gone 22-4 over the last 2 seasons with a Rose Bowl victory and a college football playoff appearance. Does that seem like a fireable offense to you? Does that seem like a hot seat resume? Doesn't to me, I'll tell you that much. Day has an overall record of 45-6 as head coach at Ohio State. I think Ryan Day has kept up with where Urban Meyer really left off. He's eclipsed maybe Urban Meyer in a couple of categories, but he hasn't eclipsed Urban Meyer, and he really hasn't kept up with Urban Meyer in one category, and that's beating the Michigan Wolverines. Look, if Ryan Day goes 11-1, if he wins every other game, you'll go on the road, you can beat Notre Dame, you beat Penn State, you beat Wisconsin, you go 11-1. Okay, that's probably a college football playoff type of resume. He's not getting fired. Nothing's happening. Even if he loses a third consecutive time to Michigan, nothing's happening as Ryan Day. Because I think Ryan Day has really kept up. Now, when you have a full cupboard of goods that you have at Ohio State, it's easy to succeed in that type of system. But I think there's something to be said with keeping up from where a legend like Urban Meyer really left off. You've seen some instances where a coach retires or a really good coach moves on to another job and a new coach comes in and it just falls off the wagon. Look what happened when Chip Kelly put up all that success at Oregon. He left and Mark Helfrich couldn't really keep it up in Eugene. There's something to be said for Ryan Day's coaching talent to be able to keep the program where it's at right now. You can win games against every other team in the Big Ten Conference at Ohio State, but if you can't beat Michigan, there's a problem. But I don't think it's a big enough problem that will cost Ryan Day his job. Now, a big reason that Ryan Day has had as much success that he's had, it's because this is one of the best, if not the best, offensive program in all of college football right now. And a big reason why they've been so successful on the offensive side of the ball has been quarterback play. And they had one of the very best Ohio State quarterbacks, maybe one of the best 2-year stretches in Buckeye history in CJ Stroud. What he was able to do the last couple of years combined for over 8,000 yards, 85 touchdowns, finished in the top 5 in Heisman voting, finished 4th in 2021, finished 3rd in 2022. How do you replace that? Well, the good thing about Ohio State, like I said about Ryan Day, is they recruit at an elite level. They bring in really good talent, and quarterback position and replacing that quarterback should go pretty well for the Buckeyes. You look at Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. It looks like it's going to be Kyle McCord, even though there's still technically a battle going on. Devin Brown, was banged up during spring ball, did not play during the spring game. Kyle McCord has that chemistry, having played high school football with Marvin Harrison Jr., who we'll talk about, of course, a little bit later on in this preview. So it looks like it's going to be Kyle McCord. A 5-star coming out. He was also the backup quarterback to CJ Stroud last season. I believe it's going to be Kyle McCord. Good things have been heard coming out of Columbus as it pertains to Kyle and his chemistry with these wide receivers and these playmakers that are on this offense. And there are a lot of playmakers. I'm going to get into a few variables with Ohio State this season. I believe Kyle McCord is going to have a really good year coming on campus because of all the weapons that he have around him. But there are some variables that could maybe swing some things the other way. We'll get into those variables. So let's talk about those weapons. Why don't we? Let's talk about them. When you talk about weapons, and boy, there are a lot. Take a deep breath, Ted. There's a lot to talk about on the offensive side of the football. You got to start with Marvin Harrison Jr., Kyle McCord's high school teammate. Over 1,200 yards and 14 receiving touchdowns last season. Unanimous All-American, Big Ten wide receiver of the year. Here's the thing about Marvin. He makes everything look insanely easy. He went up against really good corners and really good defenders throughout the season. Things were looking easy in the Georgia game until he got hurt. And I think it was the Marvin Harrison Jr. injury that held Ohio State out of the national championship game. There's an argument to be made. If Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't go down, whether that was targeting or not can also be discussed. That's another can of worms. If that doesn't happen, Ohio State might be the national champions, and we're having a completely different discussion as it pertains to the opening of this preview for Ohio State. He makes everything look so easy. Like what he was able to do against some of the, like against Penn. I look at Penn State specifically. Like he had Kalen King on the team. You got Joey Porter Jr. at corners on that team, and he made things look insanely easy in that game against the Nittany Lions in Happy Valley last season. He's going to be a Heisman candidate. He's going to be the top wide receiver in the country, and you might have the second best wide receiver in the country in the same freaking wide receiver room in Emeka Egbuka, right? He might be number 2 in all of college football at the wide receiver position. That's how loaded these Buckeyes are. He finished 9th in the country in receiving yards last season at 1,151 and receptions of 10 or more yards with 46. So he finished 9th in the country in both of those categories. 10 touchdowns last season. Here's the thing about Emeka Egbuka. He gets open a lot because you got Marvin Harrison Jr. on the other side. Okay, if he was the top guy, maybe things would be a little bit different. But because you have a generational talent in Marvin Harrison Jr. on the other side, Emeka Egbuka is open, and all of a sudden Emeka Egbuka puts together a couple of consecutive 10-yard catches. Now all of a sudden, oh wait, now we got a shade to him. Oh, now Marvin Harrison Jr., the best player maybe in the freaking country, has a one-on-one matchup, and that's easy money every day of the week. Cash it in the bank. So because of that dynamic, Ohio State is going to be just fine. Now let's keep going down the list a little bit. Let's go to Julian Fleming, another guy, 533 yards and 6 touchdowns last season. How about the tight end Cade Stover, 406 yards and 5 touchdowns. Let's keep going. I said we're going to need some deep breath. But before we get into the rest of it, let's talk more about Cade Stover. Receptions and yardage totals last year for Cade Stover were the most by a Buckeye tight end in 28 years. You got to go back to 1995, and good old Ricky Dudley had 37 and 575 back in the mid-90s. So Cade Stover putting up very good tight end numbers historically for the Scarlet and Gray of Ohio State. Look at Jaden Ballard. Look at Xavier Johnson. You just keep going down the list. Every single one of these guys can contribute, and that's what makes the Buckeye offense so lethal. You got to look at the freshmen. They recruited 3 out of the top 5 freshmen from this last year's class at the wide receiver position. Yep, you bet it. You guessed it, all coming into Columbus, Ohio. I take a look at Carnell Tate as maybe the top freshman. He performed very well in the spring game. I think he's the next great Buckeye wide receiver. All right, that's wide receivers. That's the talent catching the football from likely Kyle McCord, but they got more talent. They got talent all over the freaking place. Let's talk about the backfield. They have, well, you got to have a 1-2 punch in the Big Ten. If you don't have a 1-2 punch, you don't have a running game in the Big Ten Conference. It sure seems that way. Look, let's take a look first at Travion Henderson. A little bit banged up in 2022, but he had a fantastic 2021 as a freshman. Over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns as a true freshman. In 2021, he was a freshman All-American that last season. As I said, injury-riddled year in 2022, but he still found a way to rush for 571 yards and 6 touchdowns, and still found a way to be an honorable mention All Big Ten selection. Somehow, some way, he's flying under the radar this season, probably because of injuries. But when you look at his talent, he's as talented as any of these Big Ten running backs. When you look at the Blake Corums and the Donovan Edwards and the Braylon Allens and the Nick Singletons and all those great Big Ten running backs, Travion Henderson is in that category. If he can be healthy and he can be the number 1 back, he could rush for 1,500 yards. He could rush for 20 touchdowns. You got a new quarterback, remember, so you might lean on a little bit of the run game, especially earlier in the season. Now, when he went down last year, Mayan Williams really stepped up. 825 yards, 14 touchdowns, third team all Big Ten running back. So how do I think this is going to play out this year? I think Travion Henderson is going to be the main guy. If he's 100% healthy, he is the guy in Columbus, Ohio. But Mayan Williams is a power back. Mayan Williams, I don't think he has the breakaway speed and agility and that type of game-breaking ability that Travion Henderson has, but I think this is a guy that can run between the tackles really good. He also has speed to get to the next level. I just don't think it's as powerful and as fast as Travion Henderson. Put both of them together, they're a great tandem. Dallin Hayden and Chip Trainum, those guys stepped in an injury-riddled season in the backfield as well. They'll be involved as well, depth-wise as well. Okay, here's kind of one where I wanted to get into some variables. We talked about Kyle McCord. We talked about the quarterback position. A variable is the offensive line. If quarterback is not the biggest question mark on offense for Ohio State this season, it's the offensive line because you lose 3 starters off of that offensive line. Let's take a look first. Paris Johnson, one of the best tackles in the game. He was a 6th overall pick to the Arizona Cardinals. Consensus All-American. You look at DeJuan Jones. You look at center Luke Weipler as well. So how do you replace that? That is really good talent on your offensive line. Okay, they're good in the interior. I'll get to that in just a minute. I want to start outside at tackle in Josh Fryer. It's his 4th year in the program. He's experienced. He knows what Ohio State football is all about. He's got big shoes to fill at left tackle, filling in for Paris Johnson. He started versus Indiana last season at right tackle. I like what the guards, as I said, the interior really provides. You look at Donovan Jackson, a first-team All-Big Ten performer in 2022. How about Matt Jones? Started 12 games at right guard, last season. Second-team All-Big Ten. So I think they're going to be able to run between the tackles very well. I think the interior run game and the interior push is going to be really big. I think the big question is at tackle. Here's the thing about a young quarterback. If your tackles, I know Paris Johnson, those are big shoes to fill, but if your tackles aren't great and opposing defenses are able to get pressure on you coming off the edge with a young quarterback, maybe that rattles things a little bit more with Kyle McCord. Maybe the quarterback position doesn't have enough time to throw for these deep balls and these deep routes to really develop. We know how much Ohio State loves to hit the big play. And a key to hitting the big play is the pass protection on the outside with the offensive tackles. If they can replace that, and if they can be in the ballpark of where they were last season, I think Kyle McCord's going to be all right. But if he's facing a lot of pressure and these great wide receivers don't have time for the routes to develop, I think there could be issues. If that is the case, you could see more of the short passing game and guys like Ibuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Travion Henderson. He's been involved in the passing game as well. You can see more of those guys looking to get yards after catch. Short passing game, get these guys in space and let them create if your tackles aren't as good in pass protection. Look, it's the Ohio State offense. It's Ohio State. They're going to be fine. They're going to do good. Are there a couple of variables? Yes, there are, but there are a smorgasbord, a plethora of weapons at Kyle McCord's disposal. Buckeyes, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. They're going to be one of the best offensive teams in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. Let's flip to the defensive side of the football. Second-year defensive coordinator Jim Knowles has a front 7 that could be as good as it gets in the Big Ten and in all of college football. They have a dangerous front 7. I wouldn't want to line up and game plan. I wouldn't want to be an offensive line coach. I wouldn't want to be an offensive coordinator. How do we slow down this pass rush? How do we slow down this front 7? Okay, I talked about in my Penn State preview, maybe my favorite player in the Big Ten on offense might be Nick Singleton. My favorite player on defense in the Big Ten might be JT Tuimoloau. Man, oh man, is this guy fun to watch. Look at the film of Penn State last year, and he did just about anything and everything. One of the best defensive games that I've ever seen in my 20-plus years watching Big Ten football. Last season, JT, 10.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks last season. He had 3.5 sacks as a freshman last season, or as is in his freshman season as well. So 3.5 sacks his first 2 years there. First team All Big Ten. Here's the thing. At 6'4", 370 pounds, he's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got the agility. There were plays. You look at that interception against Penn State, he's dropping into coverage. He's dropping back. And he's covering people, and he comes out, he shows the athleticism and the footwork. I think this guy's going to really burst onto the scene and put up even bigger numbers this season than he did last season. I think a big reason is because of the guys I'm about to mention as well. Look at Michael Hall Jr. on the interior of that defensive line. 7.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks last season. Like on the offensive side, like Emeka Egbuka, he's a guy that can succeed and will succeed when the shift focuses to the exterior, to the outside of the defensive line and JT. And I'll talk about Jack Sawyer in just a minute. On the interior, Michael Hall Jr. I think could have a big year because of the amount of talent and pass rushing talent there is on the outside of this defensive line. Let's get into the linebackers, because these are very good linebackers. Man, when I look at Tommy Eichenberg play football, I close my eyes and dream back to the days of James Laurinaitis. Very similar. The resemblance is uncanny. The reincarnated version of James Laurinaitis, maybe. When I look at Eichenberg, 120 tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss last season. He led the team in both of those categories. 5th in the country in solo tackles with 77. He also led the Big Ten in solo tackles. First team All-Big Ten. Second team All-American. Like James Laurinaitis before him, he always finds a way to the football. You know, we talk about having a nose for the football. That's that football intelligence sometimes that can't be taught. That anticipation, that knowing the game of football. I feel that Tommy Eichenberg has that. There's a lot of great linebackers in the Big Ten. Tommy Eichenberg might top the list this season at Ohio State. Got to look at Steel Chambers as well. 77 tackles last season. That was second on the team. Also had a couple of interceptions. 17 consecutive starts dating back to 2021. So when you factor in Eichenberg and Chambers, these are guys that have logged snaps. Now, I know last year you kind of brought in Jim Knowles as the defensive coordinator his first year, but there's a lot of experience in this linebacking core. Honorable mention all Big Ten last season for Steel Chambers. And we talked about JT and his size and his agility. I also look at Jack Sawyer as another guy that can play in a variety of ways. He can play that jack linebacker, right? He can put his hand in the ground at a defensive end, or he has the agility, the movement to play from an upright position and do the things that an outside linebacker needs to do. At 6'4", 265 pounds, he is a matchup nightmare because of those things that I just mentioned. He was honorable mention all Big Ten in 2022, 6.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks last season. There are a lot of good pass rushing units in the Big Ten this season. I covered one at Penn State, all right, a few days ago. Ohio State, man, with JT, with Sawyer and Michael Hall and Tommy Eichenberg and all of these guys, there are going to be Buckeyes living in backfields this season. Another guy to keep an eye on is CJ Hicks. He was one of the top recruits in the class of 2022. I think he was one of the top linebackers, maybe number 1, number 2, depending on which service you look at. A lot of talent, could help with some depth if they got some injuries up there. Now, for as much as I'm going to praise this front seven, and there is a lot to praise on this front seven, a secondary, there are some questions. You lose 3 guys that played a big part in this secondary last season. Now, there are questions, even though this was a decent pass defense statistically. It was 4th in the Big Ten in passing defense last season. They lose Cam Brown. They lose Tanner McAllister, who led the team with 3 interceptions. They lose Ronnie Hickman, who was a 2-time All-Big Ten player at safety. Now, one player, when you talk about those losses, the one player that's really been the consistency and will continue to be the consistency in the secondary is Denzel Burke. He started all 24 games he has played over the last 2 seasons. Freshman All-American in 2021, honorable mention All-Big Ten in 2022. Now, here's the thing about Denzel. You're not going to mention him with some of the best corners in the Big Ten. You're not going to mention him with Cooper DeJean. You're not going to mention him with Kalen King and the Will Johnsons and other really good corners in the Big Ten. But he is that next tier. He's in that next tier in the Big Ten. Considering the amount of Big Ten football he's played, considering the amount of Big Ten wide receivers he has covered, maybe Denzel Burke will take a jump forward this season. But then you got to talk about some of these replacements. Let's throw a few of them out there. Josh Proctor, a 6th-year guy, 4 starts last season, honorable mention, all Big Ten. You look at Lathan Ransom, 74 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss last season. He's a safety that's maybe more involved, can step up a little bit more in the run game. Started 9 games last season, honorable mention, all Big Ten. How about the transfer Jihad Carter as well from Syracuse, honorable mention, all ACC. 3 interceptions last season. So when you're looking at a guy that can maybe replace what Tanner McAllister did, taking the football away, maybe Jihad Carter can be that guy. There's some other guys kind of thrown in there as well. But when I look at secondaries, I think Iowa has a really good secondary. I think Penn State and Michigan have a really good secondaries. I just don't think Ohio State is quite on that level. There's a lot to replace. There's a lot of questions. I think Ohio State defensively is going to lean on their front seven. And I think that's where you talk about Ohio State being a top 5 team in the Big Ten in pass defense last year. I think a lot of that had to do with the front, with quarterbacks constantly being uncomfortable throwing the football. I think that's going to have to be the key to success, once again, for Ohio State on the defensive side of the football. Okay, we know the goals for Ohio State. We know how close they were to playing for a national championship. We know that they maybe could have won a national championship last season, but navigating this schedule this season is going to be very interesting. Of course, the game that really sticks out early on is the first big challenge for Kyle McCord when you got to go to Notre Dame in primetime on NBC on September 23rd. That's the first big challenge. Okay, you can say what you want about Indiana. You're going to gain confidence playing Youngstown State and Western Kentucky at home, but that game at Notre Dame, that's going to be a battle. We know about Sam Hartman transferring in to South Bend. That's going to be a fun one. That's going to tell a lot about what the future holds this season for Ohio State. If they're not able to get it done against Notre Dame, I think people like me and others are going to start to second guess them. And it depends how they lose as well. Remember that game against Notre Dame last year where they had to get tough? They had to get physical, and Notre Dame did a really good job defensively against them. We'll see if that can happen again. Look at the Maryland game. That's coming off the Notre Dame game, excuse me. So Maryland after Notre Dame, there's a bye week in there as well. Remember how close Maryland played Ohio State last season. Keep that in the back of your head as well. Ohio State, never easy for the Buckeyes to go to Ross-Ade Stadium, especially as of late. How about Wisconsin after Penn State? Okay, I think the schedule fares pretty well. I look at the talent that Ohio State has. I think they can beat Notre Dame. Penn State at home is huge. Wisconsin is a good team, and going in there is not going to be easy, but it's tough for me to imagine Ohio State losing to Wisconsin, and Michigan. It's hard also talking about things that are hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine Ohio State not losing to Michigan. Being in Ann Arbor. It's hard for me to imagine that, but maybe things will change as this season progresses. I'm excited to see what Ohio State can do. I'm excited. Of course, it's the obvious play. It's the obvious take to say, look at all these weapons. It's going to be great to see these weapons, but maybe I'm most excited to see what that defensive front can do, because there's a lot of really good fronts. We talked about Penn State. We talked about Iowa. There's a lot of really good fronts in the Big Ten. Ohio State is going to be one of the better defensive fronts in the conference. But you know what it comes down to. It all comes down to the final Saturday against Michigan. Can Ohio State buck the trend and once again be Big Ten champs?
Thanks for watching Big Ten TED, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.